Hello, friends. Welcome back to another episode of Vital Descent. I'm your host, as always, Patrick McFarland. This one is episode 270. Show notes at vitaldescent.com/270. And tonight, I'm really glad to be joined by my good friend, Misty Winston. Misty, welcome to Vital Descent. I'm really glad to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I know that, the biggest way that I know you is from the Julian Assange, Free Assange movement. So I guess let's first, if you want to introduce yourself and talk about your activism, and then we can kind of dig into the Assange stuff.
I have always been a supporter of WikiLeaks as far back as the 2010 releases, the Iraq and Afghanistan war logs, the Guantanamo files, all of that stuff, the collateral murder video. Actually, it was the collateral murder video that really first piqued my interest. I don't know how it couldn't. If you haven't seen it, you should go watch it. But when I first saw it, I was like, what is this? What is this? And it really kind of piqued my interest and drew me into WikiLeaks. So I was always kind of a casual supporter. I wasn't super active or anything like that. I read the leaks, I donated, I bought merch, I did all of that stuff. But I really didn't get super involved in the activism side of things until he was essentially kidnapped from the Ecuadorian embassy in April of 2019. I was, I would say, a little active prior to that. Attended some rallies and I did some things, but it wasn't, anything that extensive until he was pulled out of the Ecuadorian embassy. And there was something about watching him be literally carried out of that building. I think naively, I thought prior to that, I thought certainly they're not going to arrest a journalist for doing journalism. Like, obviously, they want to keep him in the Ecuadorian embassy. They want to cause him as much headache as possible, but they're not going to arrest a journalist for doing. They did. So there was something about seeing that and recognizing that that was actually happening that I guess just kind of set off my ADHD and my hyperfixation. And that really sent me on it's now nearly 5 years, and I've been very thoroughly involved in the activism side of things since then. And so, yeah, it was just, it was one of those things that I think that we all remember where we were for 9/11. We all remember where we were for whatever. And that was one of those moments for me is I will always remember where I when Julian Assange was arrested. So that's really what kind of kicked me off.
I do remember that I was conscious enough, I got into libertarianism last 2014, maybe earlier, like in the 2012 Ron Paul presidential run. But I didn't really get into foreign policy specifically until, I don't know, maybe 2018 or 2019. And I do remember when he was pulled from the embassy, but I don't remember what I was doing at the time that it happened. But I
Yeah.
think from my like perspective, we were talking about how I this is one kind of a blind spot for me a little bit, which like I have a lot of shame about. But um, so the thing that why it seems so important to me is because it's literally, it's about a human being first of all, but
Yeah.
second of all, the importance of having transparency and doing a patriotic act. And I know that Assange is Australian, but it having transparency in the government, having press freedom, and what a huge blow this is for regular journalistic activities, but also the idea that the United States jurisdiction just expands all over the world, and you can be in a foreign national and publish U.S. state secrets, in quotes, and basically have a death sentence for it.
Yeah, well, and this also it's kind of a Pandora's box. This opens up the precedent. It sets a precedent that any country now can be like, oh, well, if you can do that to Assange, then we can do that to whoever. So an American journalist can now theoretically be arrested by any country in the world if you publish something that they don't like. Obviously, it would be trickier because the United States is unlikely to extradite an American journalist to another country. But I just think that it really does open up that Pandora's box. It sets this unbelievable historic precedent. This will be the first time in history that a journalist is charged under the Espionage Act. And again, as you mentioned, he's not American. The idea that he's being charged under the American Espionage Act when wasn't born in the United States, has never lived in the United States. WikiLeaks has never been a United States-based publication. So the idea that we think that we have that kind of, as you said, global jurisdiction is just mind-blowing to me. And I think that it's just really, you're right. There's so many aspects of this. Obviously, there's the human aspect. There's this man who has been persecuted now for nearly 14 years in some form or another. He's been held in indefinite and arbitrary detention for over a decade, been subjected to psychological torture, and these are all things that we know, like that it's verifiable fact. It's not like I'm making this stuff up or I'm, this is conjecture about how he's been treated or whatever. These are all documented things that have taken place. His human rights have been violated. I mean, I can't even count how many times. And the idea that that is happening in broad daylight on the world stage is a little terrifying for sure. And then there is also, as you mentioned, the press freedom and the freedom of speech implications, which are massive. I mean, this again, the first time a journalist charged under the Espionage Act, I think that this has already created a chilling effect, not just across journalism, but also across whistleblowing. And obviously, that is the goal. That is what the intention is here. They're kind of using Assange. I often liken him to like the proverbial head on a stake outside the castle walls. They're kind of using him as that weapon and as that warning to other journalists and to whistleblowers. If you come for us, this is what we will do to you. And I think there's no question that has had a serious impact.
As a lawyer, the main thing that at least bothers me in the short term. I mean, a lot of it bothers me, but the short term is that his legal team was being spied on.
Yes.
Was it by the CIA or was it a different
Yes.
agency? Okay.
Yes.
And that is, I mean, it goes beyond, it crushes the sanctity of attorney-client privilege. Like, I don't, it's bad enough, when you're practicing locally here and you go into the jail and you're in a situation where you feel uncomfortable, where, like, I don't know, you're talking to your client and there's glass there, but there's a security officer right behind you or
Yeah.
behind him, and you're wondering what you should or shouldn't say because they're there, but you're in a shitty situation because you got to go to court in 10 minutes. And I mean, or just talking about the case or what have you, but yeah, something like this, even more nefarious than, oh, well, we're overstaffed or we're understaffed today, and you got to talk to your client when there's a court security officer right next to him or something like that. This is ill will.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I'll take a little bit of time to explain what you're talking about for
Yeah.
those people who aren't aware of. It sounds crazy, right? Like a bad spy movie. What, he was spied on? Yes. So Julian Assange, for those who do not know, was being held in the Ecuadorian embassy for many years. He was trying to avoid extradition to the United States. Everybody made fun of him, said that he was being paranoid, that there is no indictment. There was a secret indictment. He was, and he knew that. He's very smart and very intuitive about those things. So he went to the Ecuadorian embassy and sought asylum there. He was granted that. He was also granted Ecuadorian citizenship. We can get into that later, how that was revoked with no due process. But so he was in the Ecuadorian embassy trying to avoid extradition. The British government, the British authorities wouldn't let him leave the Ecuadorian embassy. He went into the embassy just to seek asylum, and then the intention was that he was going to then travel to Ecuador. But the British authorities wouldn't let him. If he stepped foot outside of the embassy, they were going to arrest him, which is why he ended up being, kind of stuck in the embassy for as many years as he was. But while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, once there was a change in the Ecuadorian presidency, there was a Spanish security firm called UC Global that was initially hired to provide security and protection for the embassy and for the president's family, things like that. After that switch in the presidency, there was it was very quickly co-opted, and it was turned into essentially a spying operation. It was no longer a security firm. It was just the CIA spy. It was funded by Sheldon Adelson, essentially entirely. And then all of the information that they were gathering, which was vast. There were microphones in fire extinguishers. They had microphones in the women's bathroom. They were any visitors that Julian Assange had. They would take their electronic devices and clone them. They would photograph paperwork that they had with them. You name it, they did it, and they were sending all of that information back to the CIA. So Julian Assange, who is during this time was in a legal battle with the United States government, with the CIA, and they were then spying on everything that he was doing there, including conversations with his legal team, which in my opinion, that alone should be enough to set this case on fire. Like that alone that should null and void everything that they're doing. If you can imagine being in this legal battle, having to go into court against the world's largest empire, and the whole time they've been spying on your conversations with your defense team. That's insane, right? And that's where we're at. Again, it sounds like a bad spy novel, but this is something that we have verifiable evidence that they were doing.
Yeah, and it's crazy too because sometimes you'll be in a situation like, okay, so if you're in a jury trial and an attorney asks a bad question that he's not supposed to ask about, that the judge said, "Hey, before the trial, he ruled we're not going to go into this because it's not relevant or it's not admissible," and the lawyer reveals that information anyways, and the jury hears it. And the
Hmm.
judge says, disregard that, disregard that. Well, you can't unhear it, right?
Right. Yeah.
And so if Julian Assange is speaking with his lawyers and the United States government is spying on him and hears that, well, that information, is it's going to disadvantage him in any legal proceeding, whether the judge disallows it or not, because they're going to know what the strategy is, right? It's just an
Yeah.
upper hand.
Yeah, for sure. And I think there's also an actual court case that's taking place regarding the UC Global situation. There are four defendants, United States citizens. I think it's a journalist, two lawyers, or maybe it's two journalists and two lawyers. There's four of them total. Margaret Kunstler is one of them. I'm forgetting the names of the other three. I apologize. But they are American citizens who are suing the CIA and Mike Pompeo, who was then CIA director, for the UC Global situation because they visited Julian Assange while he was in the Ecuadorian embassy, and they were spied on. So their Fourth Amendment rights were violated. The CIA in the United States is trying to claim that your Fourth Amendment rights don't come into play if you're in another country. But the judge in that case has ruled that that's not the way that this is going to play out. There's also a court case about this in Spain as well, which Mike Pompeo has been called to testify in and is desperately trying to avoid doing so. So there's two different court cases on the UC Global situation in two different countries right now.
Yeah. And yeah, it's crazy how in the United States, and like as a libertarian myself, it's like, okay, there's this debate about, for foreign policy purposes, are we libertarian universalists, right? Do we believe that these rights exist no matter where you're from or where you live? But the neoconservatives would say, well, we have to liberate these people and give them those rights. So it's like this huge like catch 22 in libertarianism, but I don't think the US government has the right to say, okay, well, we only believe in the Bill of Rights if you're an American citizen, right? Either
Yeah,
you believe in them or you don't. That's
right.
kind of what I think.
Well, and these four defendants from the court case in suing the CIA and Mike Pompeo, they are American citizens. They're just trying to claim that those rights don't exist for Americans
Hmm.
if they are in another country.
Oh, right.
So
Okay. Okay.
yeah,
Yeah.
it doesn't apply to Julian Assange because he's not an American, but it
Sure.
also doesn't apply to these four American citizens
Who?
because they were in another country when they were spied on, which
Okay.
is what
Right.
they're claiming.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I misunderstood a little bit. That's my fault. But I think so. Let's go in. I mean, you already kind of touched on the timeline of, so Julian Assange. He knows there's a secret indictment. He goes to the Ecuadorian embassy in the UK. Right? Is that in
Yes.
London?
Yes.
So he was never actually in Ecuador. He was in London, and so he was hiding out there for a number of years, um, and then so he gets taken, and then where is he taken to then?
So this is how it kind of broke down. So in March of 2017, Julian Assange and WikiLeaks released Vault 7. For those of you who don't know what Vault 7 is, you should. It is the largest CIA leak in history, and it reveals a lot of really terrible, awful, terrifying, nefarious stuff that the CIA is able to do. The way they're able to hack into your car's computer, which could, for assassinations and things like that, that could be no question they're already doing that, but also that they can use your Samsung TV to spy on you and a whole host of other things. There's so many things in Vault 7 that everybody should be fully aware of. I mean, I could take hours to discuss all of it, but go read Vault 7. But I think that was really the catalyst. I think that prior to that, they were happy to just let Julian Assange waste away in the Ecuadorian embassy. I don't think that there was really any urgency of getting him, quote unquote. But I think that really, again, Mike Pompeo was then CIA director. I think he took that personally. I think that he was hugely embarrassed by that leak of information. And In fact, in April of 2017, he dedicated his first full speech as CIA director essentially to going after Julian Assange and WikiLeaks. That's when he famously called Julian Assange a high-tech terrorist, things like that. And that really kind of set the ball in motion for them to actually arrest Julian Assange. So then you get to 2019, April of 2019. And as you mentioned, he was then pulled out of the Ecuadorian embassy, literally carried out of the Ecuadorian embassy. And he was taken to what's called HMP, Her Majesty's Prison, or I guess it's His Majesty's Prison now, Belmarsh, which is often called the Guantanamo of the UK. It is really awful conditions that he's being held in with no charge. He's being held on remand. He has no charges in the UK. He's essentially just being held because the United States says so.
And so the current legal battle, and this leads us to what's happening the week that this will air. Hopefully, well, it will air before then, but the current legal battle, it's been going on for a while, right? Opposing his extradition to the United States.
Yeah, so that has been taking place essentially since he entered into Belmarsh. There has been an attempt to extradite him to the United States, which, by the way, there's also been reporting in recent years that the United States, and we have over 30 named and unnamed sources from inside the CIA, who Michael Isikoff was one of the reporters who did work on this, who said that there had been plots developed at the highest levels of the Trump administration to either kidnap or assassinate Julian Assange. So we're talking about there's a conversation being had right now and has been since 2019 for the UK to extradite Julian Assange to a country that they know was plotting to kill him, which is insane that is even a consideration. But this is where we're at. So since 2019, there's been this battle for extradition. They've obviously been dragging it out for as long as humanly possible. For anybody who's familiar with WikiLeaks, you'll recognize when I say the Stratfor files. So there was emails released in the Stratfor files where they were talking about how to deal with their Assange problem. And one of the ways that they talked about was, well, we'll just tie him up in legal stuff for the next 25 years. Very clearly, that is what they're trying to do. So this has been a very long and drawn out process. I won't go into all the specifics of the different court dates and the different rulings and things like that, because we could do, a couple hours just on that alone. But the situation that we're in currently is the Assange defense team this is kind of the last chance. This is the Hail Mary pass. So maybe about, I don't know, 5 months ago or so, Judge Jonathan Swift denied. In the UK, you have to request permission to appeal. So there was a request to appeal the decision to extradite Julian Assange. That was denied by Judge Jonathan Swift. So this is now essentially appealing that decision to deny it. So it's, again, a Hail Mary pass. This is really the last chance to prevent extradition to the United States. If the request for appeal is accepted, he will go back to Belmarsh. They will drag it out for longer. I personally, this is just my opinion. This is just the way that I view it. I think that that's likely what's going to happen. I think that they will approve the request for appeal. I don't, in my personal opinion, and this is just my personal opinion, take it for whatever it's worth. I don't think they want to extradite Julian Assange to the United States in the middle of an election year. That's not a good look. That's a really, that causes a whole lot of problems for both Donald Trump, who Julian Assange was arrested under, spied on, plots developed to assassinate him, and he failed to pardon him. And it's also a really bad look for Joe Biden. So I don't think either side, quote unquote side, wants to see him extradited to this country in the middle of an election year. So in my opinion, I think it will likely be approved, and then they will try to drag out that appeals process through the election. But if it is denied, listen, my prediction there holds zero weight whatsoever, because nothing about this case makes any sense. Nothing about this is just or legal or any of those things. So it could go either way, really. But if it is denied, then he could essentially be on a plane to the United States within hours. As soon as the extradition order is signed, he could be on a plane on his way to the Eastern District of Virginia.
Now, is it safe to say that most of Assange's supporters are on the left side of the political spectrum in the United States?
I would say no,
Really?
actually.
Okay.
Really depressing. Because it used to be, I mean, although you know me. I don't. I'm often lumped in with the left. I have a lot of friends on the left. I hang out with people on the left. But I do not like labels myself. I don't.
Mhm.
I don't necessarily label myself a leftist. I'm very politically homeless. I'm friends with people from across the political spectrum. I'm friends with libertarians. I'm friends with right wingers. I'm friends with the left. You know what I mean? Like I don't. But it is still depressing to me to watch the way the left has been co-opted and manipulated away from issues that used to be very solidly leftist issues, things like being anti-war, things like being pro-free speech, things like, you know what I mean, like that used to
Yeah,
be pretty solidly leftist. And unfortunately that's not the case anymore. And I think that liberals hate Julian Assange. It's interesting to watch the way that's played out because in I think it was 20 maybe 2012. I could be getting the year wrong there. Julian Assange did a TED talk in a room full of liberals and got a standing ovation because he had exposed George W. Bush, and they loved him
of
for it.
course.
Now, after he has exposed Hillary Clinton in 2015 and 2016, liberals hate Julian Assange. And I think that that just sucks because it really exposes the tribalism. It's not about consistency of principle, it's about teams. And I really hate that. Actually, currently, at least in my experience, I think that there are a lot of leftists that support him, but I think there's a lot of people, there's a lot of like the libertarian kind of side of things, left libertarians, right libertarians. I think that's a pretty solid support base for him. Actually, a lot of Trump supporters support Julian Assange. A lot of them ignore the fact that it was Trump that had him arrested and all of that stuff.
Of course,
They
yeah.
don't like when you bring that up either. But they are actually, and I think that's a lot of, again, tribalism. He exposed Hillary Clinton and they love him for it.
Yeah.
So it really sucks that there's no consistency there on the issue of free speech, but I'll take support wherever I can get it. I don't care.
Well, I'm just trying to gauge where, like, so how much of a bad look would it be for Biden if he was extradited to the United States, and now he has Israel to deal with, well, his base is, I mean, his base eroding because all these campaign events, there's really brave people standing up and heckling him, which is
Yeah.
great. But if he did, you know, under his watch, Assange was extradited and legal proceedings continued. And I mean, I don't think that they're going to put Biden up for the election,
I don't either.
the way things are going. So maybe that'll be different. But yeah, I mean, I guess that is surprising for me to hear because I always did think of Assange, his support at least coming from the left. But maybe I'm stuck in 2014 or earlier or something like that.
That's how it used to be. I
Yeah,
mean, prior to the Hillary Clinton and the DNC and the John Podesta email releases of 2015 and 2016, liberals loved Julian Assange. Again, he got a standing ovation. I
yeah,
mean, he exposed the right, he exposed George W. Bush. They were big fans. And then it very quickly shifted after those releases came out in 2015, 2016. A lot of them, I'm sure you've probably heard a lot of the Russiagate nonsense, and
right,
Julian Assange got tied to that. Oh, he worked with Putin to get Trump elected, and
right,
there was the Julian Assange. Well, WikiLeaks reached out to Donald Trump Jr. And had conversations with him via DM on Twitter, and was attempting to get Trump's tax returns. They used that to try to show that he was colluding with Trump and Putin to get Trump elected and all of that stuff. So there's no evidence to support literally any of that, but they don't care. I think that it was just very easy for them to kind of tie Assange into that kind of stuff in order to, kind of paint him with that brush. It just makes it a lot easier. But yeah, they don't. Liberals, I will say liberals. I don't.
yeah.
Liberals are not the left. Liberals do not like him. There are a great many people on the left. Again, mostly left libertarians. I think that um, communists and things like that, I have an issue with on the Assange front. They don't like him for whatever reason. Generally speaking, he's not a communist, so why do I care? Which is
Okay.
very
Yeah.
ridiculous, but that's generally the issue that I have with that crowd of people. But there are a lot of people on the left who do support him. It's just been disappointing to watch the way that that has shifted over time, and the way that the left has been kind of co-opted and manipulated, really, and really just dismantled. I mean, Obama did a great job of just really dismantling the anti-war, anti-establishment left.
I wonder how things might have been different over the last number of years that Julian Assange has kind of been, on the run, legally speaking, I guess you could say. because it wouldn't be so valuable to have some of those leaks right now with everything that's going on. And
Yes.
thinking back, over my time, the things that he released were ghastly and horrible and awful. I mean, the at least, I mean, just starting with what everyone knows, the collateral murder video was just incredible. And then didn't he release all these things about the kill teams in Afghanistan?
Yes.
And so all that stuff aside, what we have going on right now in Israel that the United States is backing, and of course, who couldn't talk about too, Russia and Ukraine and all the
Hmm.
things going on there. It just, what one of the things too that we were thinking about was, Rand Paul was trying to stop Ukraine aid, and but one thing he did is he voted for a bill that would send the aid over, but he tried to add a rider, saying that we need an auditor, like someone to audit. And it seemed like, I don't know if it was Julian Assange and what he had released that at least allowed Scott Horton to get a lot of footnotes now, with the, so it's like, well, if Rand Paul could attach this auditor, this monitor to the Ukraine aid, at least, it'll still go over there, but now at least Scott Horton will have footnotes for his next book, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah. And it's so, I think about this more than I care to admit. What would we know if Julian Assange were free and WikiLeaks were fully operational?
yeah,
Because there's so, I mean, Navalny just died, right?
yes,
WikiLeaks exposed that Navalny was a CIA asset. I mean, it's, and you can, and I say this all the time. WikiLeaks hasn't really been operational for some time now. They have had to spend all of their time and energy and resources trying to save Julian's life, which rightfully so. That's what they should be focused on. But we just in the time that they were publishing and the literally billions of documents. And just really quickly, a quick aside: what WikiLeaks does, I think a lot of people miss how important it is. This is not. It's not opinion. This is not
right,
conjecture. It's not an article with sources say. It's not screaming talking heads on a Sunday morning news show. What WikiLeaks publishes is 100% verifiable and authenticated source documentation. It's just the truth in black and white. Here are the emails, here are the documents. You read it, you make connections, you decide how much value it has or what it might pertain to. And it really does make journalism as much of a science, and I mean real science, not Fauci science, as humanly possible. It really does make journalism scientific. And to me, that's invaluable because, as I was saying before my little aside there, the things that we have already learned from the billions of documents that they have released, but the things we will continue to learn. I mean, there will be 20 years from now, there will be a story that breaks, and we'll be able to go back and look at WikiLeaks and be like, oh, yeah, here's where this person made this deal with that company. And you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be things that we are able to gain from information we will be able to gain from just the leaks that they've been able to do in the time that they were publishing, for years to come, for decades to come. And that is just such an invaluable resource that I think a lot of people miss. And so, yes, I often think, you mentioned Russia and Ukraine I mean, we know that WikiLeaks has exposed Israel numerous times, not only Israel, but the United States efforts to block the ICC from investigating Israel for war crimes for years, right? So there, and I mean, I don't know if you're on YouTube. I don't want to say the 2020 the illness thing.
right. Oh,
You know
right,
what I mean?
yeah,
I don't want to get you like shut off of YouTube. They're so ridiculous about it. But I mean, what would we know about that? What would
right.
we know about Fauci? What would we know about, the WHO? What would we know about so many things? You know what I mean? So many things that we have a right to know about. And that was what Julian Assange set out to do when creating WikiLeaks. Was he would call it the first intelligence agency of the people, and that was what they set out to do, was to really hold power to account legitimately and really expose corruption and crimes and all of the things that we know is happening behind the scenes and in our name. And very clearly, that's why they want him in prison.
Well, what is it about, and I don't want to belittle him in the slightest or any way at all, but what is so special about Julian Assange as an individual that he's able to do this, that no one else can do it?
Well, I think other people could do it. I think that, what made Julian special in the time that WikiLeaks was created was that he's very when he was a kid growing up, his nickname was the Wizard. He's very, very, very smart, especially when it comes to compute. Not listen, I'm not technologically literate in any way, but he, in terms of computer systems and creating those systems and things like that. And I think that he, when he spoke to his father and he was talking about the invention of WikiLeaks, and he was like, I want to create a place where whistleblowers can send documents to anonymously. Like very often, I think there's really only been one time where Julian has known who the leaker was to WikiLeaks. It's even anonymous to him, usually speaking, generally
Was
speaking.
that Chelsea Manning?
Um, well, everybody knows Chelsea Manning outed herself.
I said, okay,
So
okay.
everybody knew who released that information. I also think that he knows who the DNC leaker is as well,
Oh,
at
okay.
least based on the conversation. He doesn't speak about sources usually, but I think he does know who the DNC leaker is, just in the way that he's spoken about it. The Seth Rich conversations that he's had and things like that. I think that he is pretty aware of who that is, and I think that there's some other people who know who it is as well. But he's very careful about speaking about sources and things like that. Obviously, he was actually offered a potential plea bargain if he would out his source on the Russia stuff. Because it would clear Trump, and he turned that down. So yeah, I mean, when he was talking to his father about creating the WikiLeaks thing, the website, he just wanted to give whistleblowers an opportunity to be able to leak information anonymously and safely. And I think the only thing that really makes him special is that he was the first to come up with the idea, and has done it better than anybody has ever done it before.
Yeah. And I really hope, I mean, I hope this goes well for him. Of course I do. And I don't know what the future looks like without someone like him. So,
Yeah.
for selfishly, for our sake, hoping that he can somehow get out of this and then continue his work. Of course, they know that that's what he would do if he were released. I mean,
I
um,
think probably. I don't
yeah,
know if it's that certain though. I mean, this is a guy who
it's been a
has
long road.
been,
Yeah,
yeah, he's been incarcerated for over a decade, subjected to psychological torture for over a decade. He's been held in essentially solitary confinement for almost 5 years now. He has been treated abhorrently. I think that he's always dealt with mental health issues. He's autistic. So I think that if he is released, and I really genuinely hope that he does, I think it's fair of us to want him to go back to work, I guess. But I think that we also need to be very mindful of what he's been
of
through,
course.
and certainly it's going to take him time to heal from the things that he's had to experience. And first and foremost, I would just like to see him home with his family. That's where he deserves to
Yes.
be. But also, I think that the broader picture is that if he is allowed to be extradited and prosecuted, that is game over really for press freedom and free speech. That's like final nail in the coffin, and we barely have it now. So if he is actually extradited, I think that really is game over. And just a quick aside, you asked what's special about Julian Assange, and I always like to make this point when we're talking about Julian Assange, because to me it speaks to who he is as a person. And listen, I've never met Julian Assange. I don't idolize him. I don't hero worship. I hero worship no one. He's not perfect. I think that he is a fascinating individual, and I think that the things that he's accomplished are incredible and should be noted. But I think that what speaks most speaks to who he is that I mentioned Vault 7 earlier. That was released in March of 2017. He's already years into illegal and arbitrary detention in the Ecuadorian embassy. He knows that there is an indictment in the United States for his arrest. He knows that he is public enemy number one of the world's largest empire, and he publishes Vault 7 anyway. I don't know that I have that kind of courage. I don't think I do. I mean, this is the largest CIA leak in history, and he knows that by doing that, he is going to put a massive target on his back. But he knew that there's a famous quote for him prior to him publishing Cablegate. He said, listen, they're going to come for me. I'm paraphrasing here. I don't have it in front of me, but he said, listen, they're going to come for me. They will make my life a living hell, but I have to publish this documentation because it's the right thing to do. And so I don't know if that makes him special necessarily. I think that there are lots of people out there who have that mentality. But I just think that speaks to his courage and his character for sure.
It makes me think of Daniel Ellsberg
Yes.
too.
They were great friends.
Okay, yeah, and that makes total sense to me.
Yeah.
I mean,
Ellsberg was a massive supporter of Julian
yeah,
Assange's. Some of his final interviews were about Julian Assange. He fought for Assange all the way up until his last days. And yeah, they were great friends.
yeah. Different generations of the same character, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah.
Kindred spirits for sure.
Well, so isn't there a number of countries in the world that will refuse to extradite someone to a nation they know practices the death penalty? And
There are, yes.
okay, is the
Yeah.
UK one of those nations, or were they before this case?
I don't know if the UK, I think that the UK, they're not supposed to extradite based on political cases. I don't know if the death penalty is off the table, but the United States has been very tricky and very sneaky in the way that they've handled that situation. Initially, the extradition request was denied on January 4th of 2020. District Judge Vanessa Breitzer denied the extradition request based on a couple different things. She essentially agreed with the United States prosecution on all of the substantive matters, the press freedom issues, but on two different points: the conditions of the U.S. prison system, which are awful,
Hmm.
and also his health. As I mentioned, he's long had really debilitating mental health issues. He's autistic. He has a lot of physical health issues, including an underlying lung condition and a whole host of other things that he's got going on that stem from being isolated and in the embassy for so long, not being able to seek proper medical care, all of that stuff. So she denied that extradition request on those two fronts. And then in the U.S. appeal for that, they offered assurances, which are so stupid. Patrick, they are so dumb. It is essentially, we promise we'll be real nice to him
Yeah.
unless he says something or does something that we don't like.
Oh,
And so
okay.
they gave themselves kind of that backdoor because what Vanessa Breitzer was, at least she claimed to be concerned with, is that he would be held under what's called special administrative measures, which are horrible conditions. It is essentially torture. You are thrown into a cell. The guards are trained to not speak to you. Your visits are very limited, including with your legal team. Your phone conversations are very limited, all of that stuff. And it's really horrific. And so she was concerned about that. He's a suicide risk, things like that. But the U.S. has also created something called a communications management unit, which is just special administrative measures. They just renamed it, and that's actually where whistleblower Daniel Hale is being held in a institution in Illinois. So they'll just find another way to treat him in that manner. And again, those assurances are not worth the paper they're written on. First of all, does anybody take assurances from the United States on literally anything
Right.
seriously? Their promise? No, I don't. But also in the assurances, they left themselves that backdoor that they said that if he says anything or does anything that they deem to be unacceptable, that they can kind of renege on that promise. So yeah, it's ridiculous.
Well, that sounds to me like in lawyer speak, it's called an illusory promise. It's
Yeah,
like you learn about it in contracts in 1L year. It's something that appears to be an offer, but it's actually, well, I'll accept at my own discretion, right?
yeah,
So
exactly.
I'll
That's exactly
perform, I'll pay you when I feel like it if I think the job is good enough. Okay.
exactly
Well, what does that mean?
nothing.
Yeah, exactly. And so okay, so what then can people do? You know, if to support anything that they could do to follow it, to support, to donate, anything like that.
So, oh my God, there's so many things. I'll try not to overwhelm people. First of all, first and foremost, the most important things are I don't know when you intend to publish this, but on Tuesday, February 20th and Wednesday, February 21st are the next two hearings. As I mentioned earlier, these are kind of the Hail Mary hearings. They're public hearings, so there are journalists who will be allowed to be in the courtroom. I still don't know. I asked Stella on, I think it was Thursday of last week. Assange has to request permission to attend his own hearings in person, which is mind blowing to me.
Yeah.
He has not been allowed to attend his own hearings in person since 2020. So we don't know if he will be able to participate in person or not yet. He has had to kind of like Skype in via video link previously. So hopefully he will be allowed to attend, because there are going to be a ton of people outside making a whole bunch of noise. And in fact, one of the last hearings that they had, the activists outside were so noisy that they had to send somebody outside to ask people to be quiet because it was making it difficult for people to hear inside the courtroom. So those are my people outside.
Yeah.
They're fantastic. The UK groups are incredible. So if you're in London or anywhere near London and you can get to the Royal Court of Justice, I think the intention is to meet up at 8:30 a.m. I think court proceedings are scheduled to start at 9. There will be speakers. There will be a whole host of shenanigans going on. So definitely, if you're anywhere near London, get out there. We need as many people to make as much of a statement as possible. But there are also tons of events, literally tons of events taking place all across the globe. I think that there are over 60 events in like 14 or 15 different countries scheduled so far. If you want to find more information about that, I always recommend people go to, my friend Alex Hills runs the page Candles for Assange. It's the number 4. It's on Facebook and Twitter. And she does a great job of collecting and compiling all of the global events and then publishing them from one central location so they're easier for people to find. But there's events in Denver and Boston and Seattle and Tulsa, and Germany's got a bunch of stuff going on. Italy's got a bunch of stuff going on. Obviously, Australia's got stuff going on. So there's stuff taking place all across the globe. So if you can't make it to London, no worries. You can find an event near you. If you can't find an event near you, be an event near you. It literally takes a poster board, a Sharpie, and a sidewalk. That's it. That's all you need. Or you can go hang up flyers, or you can send emails, or send tweets. The Twitter algorithm does not like Assange stuff, so help us get information out that way. You can call your elected representatives. In fact, I highly recommend people call your House members, call your senators too. But there's currently legislation in the House. It's called House Resolution 934, and it's calling for the immediate release of Julian Assange and the protection of regular journalistic activities. Hugely important. If you would have told me, even 2 years ago, that there would be legislation in the House that mentions Julian Assange, I would have laughed at you. But that's the kind of momentum shift that we've seen. And frankly, that's in large part due to the work of activists on the ground. In Australia in particular, they have a massive group in Parliament who now support Julian Assange. And last year, towards the end of last year, 6 members of the Australian Parliament from different parties came to the United States and held meetings with members of Congress to kind of encourage support for Julian. Following those meetings, we saw 2 bipartisan letters. I'm not a big fan of strongly worded letters. They're useless. But those 2 letters then led to this bipartisan legislation. So there's been a massive momentum shift on that front. But yeah, there's so many things. If you want to learn more about it, I recognize that it's both very simple and very
Mm-hmm.
complex at the same time. It is a journalist being persecuted for publishing the truth. It's very simple. That is the crux of, and really it's the United States seeking global jurisdiction over information and journalism. Those 2 things really sum up the case. But it is, 13, 14 years of propaganda and court stuff and hearings and all of that. So I think a big misconception that people have is that they feel like they need to be an expert in order to speak on it. You don't. You do not. I've been doing this for a long time. I still don't consider myself an expert on this case. I think there are very few people who genuinely qualify as experts on everything that's going on. So you don't have to be an expert, but there's plenty of sources out there to help you gain more knowledge and information. I think if you're a book reader, there is, I call it the Holy Trinity. Kevin Gostola wrote a book. He is an incredible independent journalist. He runs a dissenter. He's been covering the Assange situation since it was before the Assange situation, when it was the Manning stuff, literally since day 0. He wrote a great book about it. Italian journalist Stefania Marizzi wrote a really great book. She has been involved in a multi-year FOIA battle with several different countries trying to get information about the way this case has been handled behind the scenes. And then also former UN Special Rapporteur on Torture, Professor Nils Melzer. He also wrote a book. He's the guy who went and visited Julian Assange in Belmarsh, and evaluated him with two other physicians to determine whether or not he was in fact a victim of torture, which they determined that he was. So each of those three books offers a very different perspective on the case, very valuable information. If you're not necessarily a book reader, there are a couple different documentaries that you could check out. One would be my friend Juan Passarelli's book. I'm sorry, documentary. He is a longtime friend of Julian Assange's. He's been friends with him for over a decade. And I think it's called The Trial of Julian Assange. And it's less than 50 minutes long, and it's really targeted towards the uninitiated, for people who don't really know what's going on. It really gives that kind of broad overview and the general feel for why you should care. There's also a new documentary out called Ithaca, which is more of a personal look. It focuses on John Shipton and Stella Assange, which is Julian's father and wife, respectively. And it just kind of details their personal experience in fighting for Julian's life, shows the emotional kind of human aspect of things going on. And then there is there's a new documentary out it's not available in the United States yet, but it is coming here. So people can't yet check that out, but there's a lot of new sources of information that are coming out. I mean, we've seen just an unbelievable increase in books and documentaries and videos and articles and all of that stuff. So tons of stuff that you can check out. I don't want to overwhelm people with too many things, but anybody is welcome to contact me at any time if you need sources, if you have a question, if you don't know where to find something. I'm always happy to help. And generally speaking, every Assange supporter on planet Earth feels the same way. So if people have questions or aren't sure, where to find something, feel free to reach out about that.
Yeah, I'm sure that there's a similar thread that runs through Assange supporters. Like,
Yeah.
like whenever I meet a libertarian, I can tell there's something like about that person that I just feel it. Like, and but I'm sure I've kind of noticed it's the same too. And of course, it's really positive, I think.
Well, and what's crazy, and I think my favorite, because I don't like labels and I'm friends with everybody, the Assange movement has really showed me that organizing across ideologies is legitimately possible, because it is very much the Assange movement. There are people from every possible political ideology involved in the Assange situation. And we may not get along on everything. We may not agree on everything, but we recognize that this issue is bigger than any of our disagreements. And I think that is it gives me a lot of hope, because I'm a big fan of finding common cause, and not, if you want to get something done, you need to be willing to work with people who you may not always agree with. And I think that the Assange movement has proven that is absolutely possible.
Well, that's a good segue into what I wanted to spend the last, little bit of the show talking about, is because you have been, and you, I think you kind of corrected me rightfully so in the beginning of the episode, saying, well, because I've always thought of you as being more on the left, like one of my friends on the left in the anti-war movement. But if you're telling me then that you're politically homeless or you don't like labels or anything like that, how, I mean, I guess where did you come from and how did you get here?
So I've always pretty much been politically homeless. I've always, I see electoral politics as a waste of time.
Yeah.
I've always recognized that the entire system is completely corrupt, and your vote means nothing. And even if you go vote, it really doesn't matter. I think that on matters of war and Wall Street, the agenda remains the same.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they use a lot of the kind of culture war, emotionally driven issues to keep the people divided, because if we're fighting amongst ourselves, we're not paying attention to the man behind the curtain. So I've always really kind of been politically homeless. I think that I in I've never really voted much. I was a big fan of Dennis Kucinich. I'm an Ohio girl,
Okay.
so I liked Dennis Kucinich. He was really the first politician who got me interested in politics. That kind of piqued my curiosity about it. And that's when I saw him get screwed over royally. That's when I recognized that the system is corrupt, and I kind of turned away from electoral politics. I did support Bernie Sanders in 2016. With a very open mind. I recognized that he was not he was not like a big revolutionary guy, but I figured that if anything, there was a small opportunity to pull things back before we headed over the cliff. And then when I watched him cower before the establishment, despite the fact that WikiLeaks gave him everything that he needed to challenge that election, I was completely done. That was my like last foray into electoral politics, and even then, I was doing it very hesitantly, and so I was completely done at that point. So I think that that's probably why I get lumped in with the left, is because I was a Bernie supporter and I kind of come from those crowds, which is fine. Like, I'm not offended by that. I don't care if people
Sure.
think I'm a leftist. I mean, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't personally identify as a leftist or a whatever. I hate labels. I think that I find that there's a lot of good ideas out there, and I'm not willing to marry myself to any one ideology and shut my brain off and turn my critical thinking off, and kind of stick myself in a team. That's kind of the way that I look at it.
Well, I think that, with my journey coming from, like my parents were Bush supporters during the Iraq War period, and then, but they've always been liberty oriented, and
Yeah.
so in high school I found Ron Paul, and I really got taken with that, and then became a very dogmatic, very purist libertarian for a while, which is just insufferable. Um, but now, I admire that about you though, is that you don't want to turn any part of your brain off. And I've kind of
No.
been, it's like, well, we are libertarians. I mean, as you probably gathered, we tend to be very dogmatic. Like,
Yes.
this is what it is, and you can't.
Yeah, I've noticed.
But I think though that, over the years I've come to care. I still consider myself to be principled in
Yeah.
theory, right? But in practical terms, I keep an open mind and I listen to people and I try to remember that, like, to me, the principles aren't quite as important, like, not towing that line 100% accurately, um, but overall the mission of being anti-war, and at least while becoming more pragmatic and being like, okay, well, we might not change anything per se, but at least to get ideas out there and to coalition with people who at least agree with us on what we consider to be the most important issue. And the other stuff is just, we can deal with that later, is kind of how I
Right.
think.
Yeah, that's I mean, that's exactly how I think. And listen, I think it's really important to have a set of principles and things like that, but I think it's also important to remain flexible and have grace and patience and recognize that you're not always going to get what you want. And sometimes to get the things that you want, you may have to work with people that you maybe don't like that much, or maybe
Hmm.
you find kind of repugnant on other issues. And to me, I think that that's as you just said, I think it's really about prioritizing what you find to be important. And I mean, to me, like, for example, preventing nuclear annihilation, that seems like kind of a big deal. And I'm willing to work with just about anybody. I don't
For
really
that.
have very many red lines on that issue. If you want to stop the war machine and you want to stop that, the potential for nuclear annihilation, let's do that together. We don't have to be friends. We don't have to go to dinner. Our kids don't have to have play dates. We don't have to hang out. But if we can come together on that issue, and I think that the reason why I'm like that is I've recognized I'm somebody who pays very close attention to propaganda. I'm fascinated by it. And I recognize the way that they spend so much time and energy and resources keeping us divided. There's a reason for that. They don't want us coming together where we have common cause. We're much easier to control when we're fighting amongst ourselves. And my enemy is not my neighbor. I don't care who you voted for. I don't care what ism you subscribe to or what books you read. I don't give a shit. My enemy wears a $5,000 suit and sits in a boardroom somewhere. My enemy is the CEO of Lockheed Martin. My enemy is, there's a whole host of people out there who are much bigger fish to fry than the guy across the street that voted for Trump. Or, you know what I mean? Like, I
Right.
just, those little differences that we have. And listen, those are important conversations, obviously. I mean, we need to have those nuanced conversations about, serious issues, but we can't deal with any of that until we deal with a system that's designed to kill us all.
Right. And at least among libertarians, this has been a big issue, right? Is specifically Caitlin Johnstone, and this hasn't come up in
I
a.
love Kate.
Yeah, I do. I love Caitlin
I love
Johnstone,
Kate.
and this
Yeah.
has come up at least in the movement. It hasn't too much recently, but when people started to realize that, hey, those antiwar.com boys really praise Caitlin Johnstone, and hey, Caitlin Johnstone is a communist, and she believes in, like, global revolution, and the thing they always say is, well, the left wants you dead. Like,
Ugh.
the right wing libertarians say this a lot. Like, they want you dead. And it's like, well, we hate Caitlin Johnstone because she wants us all dead, right?
Caitlyn doesn't want anybody dead.
No.
I know Caitlyn, and
Yeah.
she wants no people dead. She is one of the kindest and most genuinely good people. She just wants good for people.
Hmm.
And the whole leftist want you dead thing. Now, listen, are there some fringe idiots who, find everybody outside of their little communist circles to be the enemy, and they, up against the wall and all that bullshit? Of course, there are assholes in every group. You know what
Right.
I mean?
Yeah.
Every single group has, including libertarians. There are assholes in
Yes.
the libertarian movement too. I've come across them,
Yes.
and who hate me and hate libertarians because they're friends with me, and it's very bizarre. But that's fine. Like, that's why I think it's more important to focus on people and not labels. I mean, if I turned away every libertarian simply because they're libertarians, I would be missing out on a lot of really amazing friendships and a lot of awesome conversations that have challenged me, that have caused me to look at issues in different ways, that have caused me to grow and change my opinions. And that's why I don't like the label thing. I don't like marrying myself to any ideology, because in having those conversations, as difficult as they may be sometimes, because they are, I love having my ideas challenged. I love having conversations with people that disagree with me. It makes me think and it makes me reevaluate. And I think we should all be in that space where we're looking to grow and evolve. And so, yeah, of course, there are assholes in the leftist movement. There are assholes in the communist movement who, talk about up against the wall and blah, 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 blah. They're a very tiny minority of people. And these are people who, generally speaking, just want to hang out in their safe space feeling smugly superior to everybody. They are of no consequence whatsoever, and they don't hold any actual power. So, do leftists want you dead? No. And generally, I know a lot of leftists. I've never heard any leftists whatsoever say that they want libertarians dead, ever. I've never come across one, not a single one. So that's, again, are there a tiny minority of them that maybe say things to that effect? Of course. But again, assholes in every group. And I think that when we, broad brush paint everybody with those kinds of ideas and labels, we're really shutting ourselves. We're kind of shutting ourselves into echo chambers, and I despise that more than anything else. I
Well,
despise shutting people into echo chambers.
what I really don't, I don't want to straw man these people on my side either who are saying, I don't, I, I don't know if they think that Caitlyn actively would think about killing them, that she would, plot about that. I think the point, if I'm trying to understand them in the best possible terms, I think they're trying to say, well, her ideology necessitates that we would be put against the wall because, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, okay, well, that Caitlin Johnstone, the one who loves antiwar.com, which is the crown jewel of the libertarian movement, in my opinion. It's that one who reads our stuff and who promotes our stuff
Yeah.
constantly and loves Scott Horton, or at least, loves him enough to at least be friends or bedfellows or on good terms and or promote something he's heavily involved with, like that one. I don't
Yeah.
know. So,
I think there's a lot of misconstruing where Caitlyn stands and what her actual ideology and opinions are. I
and
think that there's a lot of intentional
yeah,
misrepresentation of ideas and opinions that I think takes place in order. I mean, it's necessary in order to cause those divisions, and so
of
that's
course.
what's
Yeah.
frustrating to see. Otherwise intelligent people feed into that, and to shut people down. Why not just have a conversation with Caitlyn Johnstone?
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
she would be happy, more than happy, to explain her position on things. She's always happy to be challenged on her ideas. So yeah, it's just that's always very frustrating to me when people, kind of. I don't think it's intentional. I think that that's just the environment, the political environment that we have in this country, where it's much easier to hate each other than it is to talk to each other.
Hmm.
And that's unfortunate, but that's
Well,
where we're at.
and Twitter doesn't help with that either.
No.
And I hope too that I haven't misconstrued what Caitlyn actually believes. I don't know, like I don't know enough about that part of her ideology to even say anything intelligent upon it that
I would
people.
never speak for her.
Yeah,
Like
same.
I think I know generally where she stands, but I would never speak for her. But I do know that Caitlyn Johnstone doesn't want anybody dead. I
Right.
think that
Yeah.
Caitlyn genuinely wants a better world. I think that I feel comfortable enough saying that she really genuinely wants humans to evolve to a better place where we aren't blowing people up for profit and allowing people to starve, and where greed is taken over and all of that stuff. I think that that's her general consensus. And so I would never, I mean, I'm not trying to speak for her. I hope that she isn't upset by me saying that, but I think that that's she's genuinely one of the nicest people who wants good for everybody that I've ever met.
She did this really awesome thing too, where she started putting her columns in a physical print magazine issue.
Yeah.
And I don't, is it her husband who illustrates it, or she does?
I think
Maybe
she
she
illustrates it.
does.
He reads them. He does she
Right.
also has where he reads them out loud, which I think is great in terms of making it more accessible to people. I think, for example, I am a big fan of being able to listen to something while I'm doing laundry or dishes or whatever. It's so much easier when I have 9,000 things to do if I can
Yeah.
throw on my headphones and just listen to something. So I appreciate that. But she also has very openly said anybody, literally anybody, can use her work, republish her work. She's not
Hmm.
asking for attribution. She's not asking for credit. She just wants the work to get out there. And I think that that's really cool of her. I think a lot of people are very ego driven. She is definitely not that.
Yeah. And I think that this the print magazine issue is such a good idea. Like I
Yes.
don't know if it is in terms of like monetarily if it's profitable, but it's such a cool, unique thing. And to if you're a fan of someone to have that physical copy of their work with, and I love the illustrations too, actually. I really do. And so um I don't know, I need to get me some of that, I
She's
think.
a fantastic artist.
Yeah.
Just on the Assange front, I highly recommend everybody. It's on her YouTube channel, also on her website. She did a couple years ago. She did a multimedia piece called "The Wizard," which, as I mentioned earlier, Julian's nickname as a child was the Wizard. And it's this really beautiful poem that she wrote that she speaks over music, and then she also paints in watercolors, like the story as it plays out. And it's really beautifully done. I highly recommend people check that out.
Yeah. Yeah, that's awesome. That's so cool. So I'll try to remember to put links to all that in the show notes page so people can just go vitaldescent.com/270. But Misty, I don't want to keep, I want to respect your time. I know we just talked about Caitlin for a hot minute, but do you want to tell people how to follow your work and the projects you're doing?
Yeah, so I mean, biggest thing that I do is my radio show. Well, I guess it's not really radio technically anymore. We're also now on video, but it was TNT Radio. I think that they're trying to switch away from being called radio since we're now on video. So it's Today's News Talk or TNT. You can go to tntradio.live. But I'm on air Monday through Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern for now. Once there's a time change coming up soon here in a couple few weeks. And because the radio or the station is in Australia, they don't observe the time change. So my show will
Mm.
then be at 6 o'clock, not 5 o'clock, which is endlessly confusing. I hate it. But so yeah, it's just tntradio.live for that. This week who do I have coming up? Tomorrow I have my friend Colin Radix Carter. Tuesday and Wednesday, I mentioned Juan Passarelli earlier. He did an amazing documentary on Julian Assange. He's coming on both of those days he's going to be outside the courthouse on Tuesday and Wednesday for the Assange hearing. So he's going to come on and update us on everything that's going on there. Thursday, I have a pre-record with Professor David Miller, who just obviously won a huge court battle with Bristol University on his anti-Zionist views, which is fantastic. And then Friday, my friend Jesse Jett is going to be on. He's a really awesome kind of political musician, artist. He has a new album out, so he's going to come on and do a couple pieces for us. So, and that's really, I mean, you can follow me on Twitter if you want, at Sarcasm Stardust. I tweet a lot about Julian Assange. So if you are interested in following what's going on there or want regular updates, you can certainly follow me there. There's a ton of people you could follow though on that front.
And so it's tntradio.live.
Yeah.
That's it. Okay, that's the URL.
And then it's on all the podcast platforms. There's YouTube, Rockfin, Rumble, Odyssey, all of that stuff. But you can find links to all of it, all of the different areas where you can find it on the TNT Radio website.
In one place. Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much, Missy. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'll try not to make it a number of years before the next time is, but hopefully we see each other at Freedom Fest again soon if
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
gonna
yeah,
go.
yeah. That would be great. And listen, I'm always happy to come on. I know that you and I both struggle with with asking people to come on. So anytime, just hit me up with a DM. I'm happy to come on. And thank you for having me. Thank you for covering Julian. We need as much noise as possible, so I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. Thanks, Misty.
Thank you.